Welcome, friends. It is Monday, August the 18th, 2025. This is Hurricane Hub Live. I'm Chief Meteorologist Tim Pandages. Thanks for joining us tonight. We've got a lot to talk about tonight on HHL. Mostly Erin-centric, right? We're tracking major Hurricane Erin, as it tracks north along and just parallel offshore of the east coast of the United States. Now, it is growing in size, but it does remain a Category 4. In fact, it is nearly double the size it was when it was a Category 5 just a couple days ago, when it went through that period of extremely rapid intensification late Friday into the day on Saturday. Now, the forecast overall for the track of the center of Erin remains on track. U.S. landfall is not going to happen. Now, even though the center will stay well offshore, in some cases hundreds of miles to the east, impacts are felt well away from the center. We're going to talk a little bit more about that, why even if no areas are under the cone, you're still going to feel impacts here from Erin on the fringe side. So we're talking fringe effects here for the U.S. East Coast. Most importantly, the eastern portions of North Carolina, the Outer Banks, southeastern Virginia up through the Delmarva, and even possibly glancing places like Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard, and Cape Cod, with at least some high winds and at least some very big waves as well. And we've also got not only one new tropical wave, we've got two as of the 8 o'clock advisory out in the Atlantic Basin. One's got a low chance, one a little bit better chance of becoming our next name, which would be Fernand. All right, let's look back at the wind history here of Erin. Quite remarkable intensification period late Friday into Saturday, when it went from a Cat 1 all the way up to a Cat 5, maxed out at 160 mile per hour winds. And then it underwent an eyewall replacement cycle, very typical for a storm that intense and that size. And we saw the intensification drop a little bit. It hovered as a Category 3 through most of yesterday, and then has slowly been re-intensifying there, not rapidly this go around. And it maxed out this afternoon as a Cat 4, 140 mile per hour winds. And as we join you now at 8 p.m., the new advisory just came down. Hurricane Hunter aircraft within the storm did warrant a bit of a downgrade. Not really a downgrade, just intensity has come down a bit in terms of its peak wind speeds, 130 miles per hour, which still puts it as a Category 4, although low end, we're just at that threshold here for a Category 4, 130 to 156. And of course, it did max out as a Category 5 on Saturday. So we do expect the intensity to drop a little bit, but as it gains latitude, the wind field will expand. It's going to spread out that wind energy over a larger area. So again, even though it's tracking well off the East Coast, the wind field will make it farther to the west and inland here. So gusts up to 165. Also take note of the movement. Earlier today, it was still tracking west-northwest, a bit of a wobbly track here over the past couple of days, but still on target for where it's going to be going in the next few days from here. But it has slowed down in its forward speed. We're now moving, almost crawling, at 10 miles per hour here to the north and west. And with the latest update, the pressure has come up a little bit. And of course, that's synonymous with a drop in the wind speeds as well. If pressure was to drop, we'd see wind speeds go back up. All right, here's the past track here. This darker maroon is when it was a Category 5, when it was, I think, what was it, 150 miles off to the north and northeast of Puerto Rico. So it was a close call, and thankfully the strongest of the winds stayed on the northern and eastern side of the storm center of Erin here. But notice it was kind of wobbly here, and that's typical for when you get a small, very intense storm. The eye seems to wobble a little bit in its track, but overall, when you average it all out, it was a west-northwest trajectory here, which was right on target with the National Hurricane Center's track, although it has been adjusted, obviously, with new data, but generally moving in that direction here as we find it as a Category 4 storm. Look at it here on a 24-hour loop. You can see that it cleared out. It finished up an eyewall replacement cycle after maxing out as a Category 5, brought it down to a Cat 3, and then we saw a new eyewall emerge that was very evident on satellite imagery. You see it there. And then just in the last probably 6 to 8 hours, see the last few frames there, the eye no longer becomes visible. It looks like it may be undergoing another eyewall replacement cycle here, and we'll see how quickly that can finish up and if it does rebuild any intensity as it continues on that slowward trend to the north and west over the next 12 to 24 hours. Now, on visible satellite imagery, this is a little bit more evident. You can see certainly a warm and clear eye here on the visible. And then in the last couple of frames, it starts to disappear and cloud up a little bit and cool off. So it's been filling on in with some convection, and we're seeing that eye wall collapse, and we'll likely see another eye wall develop here. Who knows how long it'll take the eye wall replacement cycle to complete. But here's the Turks and Caicos here, awfully close, but thankfully, again, the dirty side is off to the north and east of that storm center. Still getting tropical storm force winds there, but not as bad as it could have been if it was a direct hit here of Erin. All right, look at it on the water vapor imagery now. We've got dry air completely surrounding it, and the possibility remains that some of that dry air does get entrained into the circulation of Erin, and that would help it to kind of sputter along and lose some intensity here. And that's certainly a possibility. It was even a little bit evident here. You can see the convection breaking down a little bit, a possibility of some of that dry air getting pulled into the overall circulation. It happens. So we'll see if that is a trend here. Maybe that's what led to the drop in intensity with the last update. But we do have aircraft in the system right now. In fact, there are two. There's a NOAA aircraft, NOAA Hurricane Hunter, and there's a U.S. Air Force aircraft. And that's that one right here that just plotted a surface pressure of 947. You can see that was reflected on the 8 o'clock advisory here. They'll do several more passes, so we'll see if that does get adjusted. And the trend of that pressure with each run will determine if we're on an intensification or a weakening trend here, at least in the short term. But hats off to the Hurricane Hunters, the Air Force, and NOAA, because they've been in this system pretty much constantly ever since Thursday when they rebased out to St. Croix in the U.S. Virgin Islands that have been kind of deploying from there. And they've been doing 12-hour fixes on these storms, and we've had constant data coming into the computer models. It's been helping to fine-tune this forecast. So they're probably absolutely exhausted, and their mission isn't over yet. They still got several more days to track this as it moves on to the north and east of the east coast of the U.S. So as we go forward here, we've had warm sea surface temperatures so far, that obviously warm enough to warrant a period of rapid intensification. But as it moves north, it's actually going to be moving into even warmer waters, 85, 86, 87 degree waters in this maroon color here. Marine heat wave going on in this part of the southwest Atlantic. So what is yet to be seen is how Erin will take advantage of this. Overall, the atmospheric pattern aloft is not going to be as favorable as it was when it was going from a Cat 1 to a Cat 5. But we'll see if this does get a little bit of a boost here with that kind of jet fuel type of ocean temperature water. We could certainly see it maybe maintain major hurricane status for longer, or even get a little bit of a bump in intensification. Now, that warm water is on the skin of the ocean surface, which is important because, as we've talked about in past videos, we get the upwelling with a very intense storm that's whipping up the ocean. I mean, this is a massive wave generator, and it's mixing up the ocean called upwelling. And if you don't have the warm waters extending down to a depth, you'll eventually deplete the warm waters at the surface and replace it with cooler waters from a depth. So that may be something that limits it here as it goes forward. Despite warm skin of the ocean, it doesn't extend down to a really great depth. Now, I mentioned it's a huge wave generator, so these are some buoy reports, and we've got two that are in somewhat close proximity to Erin, one just to the north and one off to the east and northeast, both plotting or at least recording wave heights of over 20 feet. This buoy earlier I saw get up to 27 feet, so it has been building some huge waves. Remember, these are propagating out, and some of these are already beginning to reach the southeast coast of the United States. A lot of times these precede the actual arrival of the storm as they kind of propagate out in all directions there. Certainly getting some very rough surf through the Bahamas, down in Cuba, down in Hispaniola, Haiti, and Dominican Republic there as well. But this is all pushing that wave energy. The wind is just pushing the ocean farther to the north here. So it's going to be interesting to see what wave heights verify along the southeast coast of the U.S. So again, here's a look at Hurricane Erin. It is prompting some warnings that are up right now, tropical storm warnings through Turks and Caicos, Emagua Islands, Abrahams Bay, and Crooked Island. And then even tropical storm watch is now posted for portions of the Bahamas. This is where they are experiencing tropical storm conditions. This is where they may experience tropical storm conditions. So they're still up there for a little while longer. Now, coming up after a quick little break we're going to take here, new tropical alerts are issued for parts of the U.S. East Coast. First time for Hurricane Erin. Latest forecast track from the National Hurricane Center. We'll talk about that and expected impacts with Erin, even though it's passing well offshore. Those indirect impacts, we'll get in depth with that in just a little bit. Welcome back. Thanks for sticking around here for Hurricane Hub Live. Here's the latest track from the National Hurricane Center in regard to Hurricane Erin. Now, we're going off the 5 o'clock track advisory here. The 8 o'clock is in, but that's just a update on the position and the intensity. The track update will come again at 11 o'clock tonight. And overall, we haven't seen many big changes with this. Sure, there's been ticks to the west a little bit, but still keeping the core of Erin well offshore. Notice it does maintain Category 4 through at least Tuesday afternoon, and then down to a Category 3, still a major storm here, 115-mile-per-hour winds by Wednesday afternoon. And then finally by Thursday, it does make that pass between Bermuda and the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Its closest pass to the United States at this point in time by early Thursday here. And at that point, it's forecast to drop in intensity down to a Category 2 hurricane, no longer a major at that point. But remember, as I said, as it gains latitude, its peak intensity will drop, but its wind field will expand, meaning even though it's offshore, the wind field will still extend off to the west and northwest, moving over land. Now, at its closest pass, even if the center of Erin takes the westernmost track within this cone, which some of the models have been hinting at here, more of a westerly track, but still offshore, we'd see that wind field come in even more to eastern North Carolina, southeastern Virginia, and even up into the Delmarva as well. Now, at this point in time, at its closest pass, there is the expectation that we will see at least tropical storm force winds, which prompted the National Hurricane Center with the 5 o'clock advisory to also issue a watch packet here for the Outer Banks of North Carolina. It even extends to the ocean waters of Virginia Beach here, and that's for the possibility of seeing at least tropical storm force winds, 39 miles per hour or greater. We could see gusts even higher than that again. If it does take a track a little bit on the western side of this cone, we'd see the core of the stronger winds get a little bit closer. So again, I talked about the advisory schedule here. That was the 5 p.m. track. We had the 8 p.m. intermediate advisory with the location and the storm details, and we'll get the full update again coming at 11 o'clock. And honestly, with these new updates that come in, there's not much that's been changing. It's been pretty dead on with the overall trend of the forecast track over the last couple of days, showing that curve off to the northwest. We're seeing that turn to the north now, so it should follow suit. And models have been on board for the last couple of days as well. Certainly, there are some outliers, and I'm sure you've seen them on social media, outliers that say, you know, we're going to get a landfall in the U.S. That's not going to happen. It's safe to say that it's a near certainty that it will stay well offshore, but as it gains latitude and gets bigger, impacts will not be zero. They will not be, especially eastern North Carolina and southeastern Virginia. Here's a look at the spaghetti plots. All of these are the hurricane models here, all falling within, for the most part, the National Hurricane Center forecast cone. And typically when you get this far out to the 5-day stretch, the cone gets larger because uncertainty is greater at that point. But even the hurricane models here are pretty much very much on top of one another, and we've got convergence of all of the models here for the 5-day trend, which is a good sign here that we'll see the forecast kind of play out as expected. In terms of the ensembles, the European and the GFS, we've talked about these for the last couple of days. These are both those models. The ensemble members are that same model, just run dozens of times in some cases, and we tweak it a little bit to get a different outcome. Even all of those different tweaks and different variables in play here leading to different outcomes, they're all pretty similar. They're all falling in line. There are a few outliers farther to the west here, a jog maybe 10 or 15 miles farther to the west-northwest. That wouldn't have huge implications. It's still staying way offshore. But even notice on these ensembles, you can kind of see that most favor either the center line or on the western side of that forecast cone from the Hurricane Center. Not as many on the eastern and southeastern periphery of that cone there. Check out the track history, okay? And there's been numerous adjustments here. Of course, you're always going to adjust a forecast as you get new model information here. It just happens. And the evolution has been at the onset starting off moving to the south, and then we've seen a west-southwest correction. And this most recent track is the farthest west so far of all the forecast tracks that have been issued previously there. So that just indicates what the trend has been. Closer, slightly closer to the U.S. eastern seaboard, but still at a safe distance offshore that we'll see just fringe effects. Here's the comparison in terms of the operational European and the American model. Both really good agreement here over the next couple of days, moving due north generally. And then by the time you're between, there's Bermuda right there, and the east coast of the United States, it looks to be passing closer to the east coast than to Bermuda. And both models are pretty much on board with this. Notice we do get the far western periphery of the storm here. But even that is going to be the weaker side because you usually see the strongest of the winds, the worst of the storm on the eastern side. We call that the dirty side of the storm. So even though we will see some winds here coming in out of the east to northeast, it should be fairly manageable. The wave heights and coastal erosion, that may be another issue to deal with here, but the wind speed should not be nothing extraordinary, which would be some good news. And then they both pretty much in line with building it off to the east-northeast and away from New England and away from Atlantic Canada. So Erin's impacts overall, rainfall, not much at all. Okay, well, I'll show you the rainfall map here. We're not expecting much. The outer rain band should stay safely offshore for the most part. May see a few outer band showers working in over the Outer Banks in southeastern Virginia. Now, wind, tropical storm gusts closest to the coast. You saw where that tropical storm watch has been issued. It may be even upgraded to a tropical storm warning, meaning that is expected or happening in those areas. And the waves and tides, large and numerous. This is a massive wave generator, and we've got computer models that can kind of show us what we may be looking at as the storm gets closer to the middle Atlantic, the closest run it'll get to the U.S. And then tides, especially here locally in Hampton Roads in northeast North Carolina, we'll have an east to northeast wind, and that's going to drive up tide levels. We do have a new moon coming our way later this week and into the weekend. That's astronomically higher tides. So you add in persistent winds out of the east to northeast, and we'll see minor to moderate tidal flooding. Looks to be Wednesday's high tide cycle in the evening, and then Thursday, both high tide cycles will bring the highest tides through the mid-Atlantic area. Rainfall, here it is. We'll go right through Saturday. Storm's long gone by that point, leaving behind not much rain. You see the highest totals here, ½ inch to maybe an inch in some of these areas down through the Outer Banks. So not a huge rainmaker. Freshwater flooding will not be a problem. Now, in regards to the wind, as it gains latitude, look at the wind envelope here, how large it gets. Yellow is the tropical storm force extent of the winds. 55-mile-per-hour gusts here in the orange, and then hurricane force winds as you get closer to the center. Even that's a very large area that you could encounter at least Category 1 strength wind gusts, probably higher than that, especially closer to the core. But notice it does make it over far eastern North Carolina, the Outer Banks of North Carolina as we get into Thursday early morning and Wednesday night here as well. Now, let's look at it here on simulated satellite, what we may be looking at in just a couple days' time. Here's model's rendition of what it looks like now, pretty on point. Now, we play it out, it pretty much travels right along the western fringe, see that, of that cone. And then by Thursday morning, we've got a very large system sitting just off the east coast of the United States. The outermost band, certainly the cloud cover will work inland, probably as far to the north and west as Richmond and even out to Raleigh, farther west and inland in North Carolina. And then the heaviest winds, of course, strongest winds are going to be right along the immediate coast there, the closer you get to the center of Erin. Now let's look at the wind envelope on the models here. Similar model here, it's the exact model actually showing that western favor of that cone. And then by Thursday morning, we're looking at the tropical storm force winds making it all the way into southeastern Virginia and eastern North Carolina. Hatteras Island could be looking at wind gusts between 50 and 60 miles per hour. Again, the core of the strongest of the winds remaining well offshore. Nowhere near Bermuda. See, we're seeing winds there of 20, 25, maybe 30 miles per hour. Strongest of the winds likely going to be along the eastern seaboard here as that builds to the north. Now let's talk about the forecast wave heights. Now, this is a truly remarkable sight. Looking at some of these wave heights by lunchtime Wednesday, already building waves up to 10 feet along the North Carolina coastline. And as the storm again follows that forecast track, here we are Thursday, 24 hours later, and we nearly double those wave heights. Could see in the coastal waters of the Outer Banks, 15 to 20-foot waves, maybe some rogue waves that are a little bit higher than that, up to southeastern Virginia, eastern shore of Virginia, 8 to 12-foot waves, a good possibility. And, of course, those waves running up against the beach, massive beach erosion will be likely from Hatteras Island all the way up through Rodanthe, Kitty Hawk, Kill Devil Hills. Going to be some big problems. And, of course, numerous houses are right on the beaches there, and even when we get a strong nor'easter, we see houses falling into the ocean there. So I fear that this may be another occurrence of that. As we get into Thursday night, storms beginning to pull farther away to the east and northeast, but still looking at some wave action here between 10 to 15 feet along the east coast of the United States. So there's a look at Erin's impacts. Rainfall, not much at all. Tropical storm gusts closest to the coast, and waves and tides large and numerous across the area. So the bottom line here, Erin stays offshore, but because it'll be so large, impacts to the U.S. are expected. Wednesday through Thursday is the timing for those impacts. Lingering surf and rip currents even right on into this next upcoming weekend. Certainly the rip current risk will be up at all the beaches, pretty much from, say, Outer Banks all the way up into New England, as the storm will still be out in the Atlantic, causing a lot of wave action. So that's not it. We talked about there are some waves to watch behind Erin. Here's Erin, obviously, the big feature on the map. Right behind it is another tropical wave that doesn't look too hot at the moment. As it builds farther to the west, it should encounter a more favorable environment as it moves towards the northern Leeward Islands. So that'll be something to watch probably later this week into the weekend for possible development. The odds of that are quite high at this time frame, 60% chance within the next 7 days. And another robust wave coming off the coast has been tagged, and a 10% chance here, a tropical wave of developing into a unnamed storm. By the way, the next name on the list is Fernand. And folks, this is where we will end our discussion tonight. When we return after a quick break, we're going to visit with our partners to talk about how folks on the ground are preparing for those Erin impacts in the next couple days. Welcome back. As our weather team and others track Hurricane Erin, they rely on models that try to predict where the storm systems will go. Now, tonight, meteorologist Evan Stewart breaks down how some of those models work and the kind of data they use to make their projections.
Hurricane forecast maps with squiggly lines representing the various hurricane forecast models are ubiquitous during hurricane season, projecting where a tropical system might go. They represent a complex set of equations and algorithms that meteorologists have been using for decades, dating back to the 1950s. Today's models are far more complex, taking hours to run on some of the fastest supercomputers in the world. Data from satellites, aircraft, ships, buoys, and land-based sensors are fed into the model's mathematical equations to create a digital version of the atmosphere. Each model has a different purpose, so they use different sets of data and equations, resulting in different forecasts. Some models incorporate the date and location of past storms, while others focus only on a storm's strength or direction of movement. Ultimately, these models are restricted by available data and computing power, but they are all improving every year.
Now, the impacts of Hurricane Erin's offshore track are disrupting countless summer vacations on the Outer Banks this week. Mandatory evacuations are in place for Dare County's southernmost beaches. Alex Littlehales reports from Cape Hatteras National Seashore on the travel chaos.
Waves projected to be between 15 to 20 feet here on the Outer Banks, cutting week-long vacations short to a matter of hours.
Minutes into their relaxing summer vacation.
More on edge than anything.
The Taylor Kopp family is back on the road again.
Yeah, at first we all thought it was a joke because we didn't know what was going on. And then it was like, oh, no, called, got the alert.
An 80th birthday celebration in this Rodanthe beach house is now a frantic search for a plan B. Heading north on NC-12 Monday.
We've come close, but we never had to be part of one.
Thousands of travelers are asking what's next as Dare County evacuates both tourists and locals on Hatteras Island ahead of Hurricane Erin. Ocean overwash from dangerous waves threaten the Cape Islands' critical roads and life-saving services.
We encourage the local folks to leave as well because we're not going to be able to provide services. If you have a heart attack, a medical event, house catches on fire, whatever, we can't get to you. And so it's real important that people sort of heed the message. This is going to be several days where we're not going to have the ability to move around in the villages.
For Monica Hartnett,
Is that you?
whose Hatteras Island travels began
Oh, it's my phone.
3 decades ago,
I think we're getting an alert.
she gets that safety comes first.
Public safety alert. State of emergency. Oh, they're just repeating it.
It doesn't mean she's happy, though, about a week-long vacation cut short. On the Outer Banks, Alex Littlehales for 13 News Now.
All right, Emily Harrison continues our coverage of evacuations, including Hatteras Island and Ocracoke Island. While local emergency officials made the call to evacuate, NCDOT is working to make sure everyone gets off the island safely.
Now 2 mandatory evacuation orders are in place as emergency leaders urge all drivers to stay away from NC-12.
There are a lot of times where we say there may be some ocean overwash on NC-12. For this storm, we expect that NC-12 may be impassable for hours at a time, maybe days at a time.
Dare County leaders instead want you to take either Highway 64 West or Highway 158 North. Tim Haas with NCDOT says for those looking to get out quickly, going west may be your best option.
There's less traffic, there's less stoppage, and US 64 connects with I-95 both north and south.
In the meantime, NCDOT is preparing for Hurricane Erin's arrival, stockpiling equipment in hotspot zones and readying crews to go out to any problematic areas. But it's after the storm's arrival that Haas says they'll really be able to see the condition of the roads.
If water gets under the road and there's pavement breakage, that's where we may have to close the road for a longer period of time.
Above all else, Haas says it's important to continue listening to emergency leaders, even if you are not in the evacuation area.
This is a time where everyone needs to realize that this is a weather emergency. They need to have kindness, they need to have patience, and to stay safe, to keep them and their families safe.
Emily Harrison, 13 News Now.
Now over to Virginia Beach. The city is gearing up for Hurricane Erin 2 on land and in the water. Brianna Fallon breaks down the latest from the oceanfront.
The water doesn't look too choppy here today at the oceanfront, but with Hurricane Erin off the coast later this week, the water could get rough.
It's going to be a great week at Virginia Beach, just maybe not the great swimming week at Virginia Beach.
Rough waters and dangerous rip currents are some of the threats Tom Gill from the Virginia Beach Life-Saving Service says the oceanfront could see later this week.
When it gets here, it's going to be so big and so rough and so dangerous. Nobody should be in the water during this, so we're going to do everything we can to keep people out of the water.
And that's due to Hurricane Erin.
Right now we're going through our checklist, looking at the different predictions and how it could impact the city, and just going through the meetings to determine what our actions would be once we kind of see what path it eventually takes.
Dave Tobsinski, Director of Emergency Management for the City of Virginia Beach, and his team work hard year-round to make sure they prepare for any type of emergency, including this hurricane.
We're primarily looking at the shoreline, what the wave heights could be, coastal or tidal flooding, along Chesapeake Bay, Lynn Haven, along the ocean front and Sandbridge beaches.
But when it comes to the ocean this week, Topsinski agrees with Gil. So if you see a red flag at the beach, your best bet is to not go in for a swim, not only for your safety, but also for the safety of first responders.
Stay out of the water and please abide by what the lifeguards are saying.
In Virginia Beach, Brianna Fallon, 13 News Now.
And we'll wrap up tonight's Hurricane Hub Live with trivia. My question for you tonight is, which hurricane in the satellite era, 1966 and onwards, spent the most time as a Category 5? Was it Erin? Was it Katrina? Was it Irma? Or was it Jose? I'll have the answer for you tomorrow night on HHL. Remember to join us 7 days a week, 8 p.m. for the latest updates on the tropics. We'll see you back here tomorrow.